Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and we are looking at the next Marcus Didius Falco book, number 14, The Jupiter Myth, which very much picks up right after book 13 does. In this one we are still in Britain, and Falco and Helena, and also consequently thus Petronius and Maia, decide that they are going to visit Helena's family because she has family who live in Britain. And they head out to Londinium, what eventually becomes London. And it's just supposed to be a family visit and stop before everybody heads back to Rome, when the sidekick of King Tagodubnus, who was in the last book, who had murdered some guys because he thought he was helping, and consequently had to be, he effectively had to be banished because they were sort of riding that political line of not being able to execute him, but what he had done was something that anybody else would have been executed for, so they had to sort of walk a line and have him, sent away, exiled for political reasons, in effect. And he is found drowned in the well in front of a extremely dubious looking bar, tavern, pardon me, and Falco basically gets hauled in on this because, he does work for the Emperor, he is an investigator, and so he basically gets backed into doing this by the people that he knows who are higher-ups in Britain, and it means that he's doing this work effectively for free because he's the best option to get the job done. But also, if he hadn't exiled the guy, then the exiled guy wouldn't have been in Londinium, and so on. And so it's one of those complicated political things. And it starts out with him just investigating the murder, but it rapidly spirals outward as he figures out that there's a gangster protection racket going on in town. The protection racket, which, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, because I am a completely incompetently unclear human being, protection rackets are basically when some gangster's bully boy shows up at a person's shop and says, pay me money for protection, and when they say protection from what, the gangster makes it very clear that it is in fact protection from the gang, who will come and wreck your stuff if you don't pay them the money. Ostensibly, it is to protect them from other mysterious gang-related assaults and so on, but what it really is our people will come wreck your shop if you don't pay us the money. And so that's what they're doing. And while Falco is there, for example, there is a baker who had resisted paying the protection money, and his bakery gets burned down. And he is later found dead, much later in the book, because he had clearly, because Falco had assumed that he had just run off to hide before he got caught, but he is later found dead. In the classic, if you don't pay us the money, see what we do. But Falco also figures out eventually that the network of businesses, are all named after various Jupiter, that is the Greek Zeus, related myths. So the bar where this happened, the tavern, is called Shower of Gold, which is not in fact a P-related joke, but is a reference to I suspect more than one myth, but there's just the one myth. I don't remember who it is that Jupiter was doing this with, but it's the myth of the god appearing as a shower of gold to a lovely young nubile woman who he promptly knocks up, because that's what Jupiter does in his spare time. He goes around and gets young women pregnant because he apparently can't keep it in his godly pants. So basically, you have all these places that get named after various aspects of Jupiter myths, and they're all fronts for businesses. And at this point, we get very much a, oh, look at this, it's a small world thing, because Florius, who was a character in previous books, makes an abrupt return. You see, several books back, we had the story of the gangster that Petronius had been effectively doing battle with for like ever, and that gangster was finally taken out, was finally, was sentenced, had to effectively flee Rome because there was a loophole in Roman law that meant that if you were sentenced to death, you basically had, until sunrise the next morning or whatever it is, and if you just get out of Rome into, out in the boondocks, you can flee and save your life, but you are, forever exiled. So they hadn't been able to actually, stop him, but he had escaped and then come back to Rome. But anyways, that guy had been killed, and then a few books later, Petronius, for reasons that are unclear to apparently everybody but Petronius, decides that the gorgeous little piece, okay, it's not entirely unclear, the extremely pretty and attractive young woman who is the gangster's daughter, Petronius decides to have an affair with her, which his wife finds out about, and she leaves him and takes the children, and he doesn't lose his job, but he is put, sort of in effective employment limbo for moral turpitude, having cheated on his wife with the gangster's daughter. Her husband, Florius, who had come across as a sort of a limp, useless, flutter-nothing of a man, it turns out was just waiting to take over in the wings, and he makes his reappearance in this book as being the guy in charge of the gang. And so he turns out to not be actually ineffectual, but to have been effectively pretending to be ineffectual because, he wasn't going to face off with his father-in-law who had all of the power of his gangs behind him, but the moment the father-in-law is dead, Florius stepped into that gap and took over the organization, and has made his way all the way out to Britain in running this particular racket. So we have this guy coming back who has made it entirely personal. He wants to get Petronius, who, by the way, is not merely in Britain because somebody had to bring Maia, that is, Falco's sister's kids, because if you'll recall in the last book, Maia had been effectively kidnapped by, Helena and Helena's sidekicks and so on because they were trying to protect Maia from, her delightful stalker. And Maia had been understandably upset that she had been effectively kidnapped with her kids left behind in Rome while she's on a boat out to Britain. And she spent the entire last book in a snit and remains still somewhat in a snit for this book. Anyways, she winds up in the crosshairs of the gang because she and Petronius sort of have a sort of maybe on again, off again kind of maybe thing, and Florius wants revenge on Petronius, so she winds up, they think she's been captured and is being held hostage, and it turns out by the end of the book that she wasn't even, that they just took advantage of the fact that she and her kids had gone on a sort of a boat day trip down the river, and the boat got, messed up by a storm, and so they hadn't been able to come back right away, and, the villains basically said, hey, guys, we totally have her captive, and then it turned out that they didn't, and so Petronius is a target because Florius wants revenge for Petronius sleeping with his wife, and it's a whole thing. And on top of that, Petronius finds out while he is in Britain that 2 of his 3 children have died So he's now working on trying to deal with this gang issue that he had come completely outside of his jurisdiction, by the way, because the Vigiles don't have jurisdiction outside of Rome. This is kind of like if a Roman police officer, like Italy Rome police officer, went to London, England, and ran around in London, England trying to do an investigation. The fact is he has no jurisdiction. However, this is also back when Londinium was on the frontier and they didn't really have much in the way of proper law enforcement out there. So, the local Roman governor is just like, you know what? It's fine. Let him do it, because I need somebody competent figuring this stuff out, because I don't have anybody doing this. Anyways, it's a whole big mess, but this book, it's really, really endemic of the interconnected nature of these books. This book stands alone. You can read it, I believe. Granted, one can always be slightly biased on this with series that one likes, that one has read everything in and, understands all the background. But I believe, like the other books in this, you can read it on its own, but it's part of this larger, very clearly interconnected world where everybody has histories and backgrounds and things that happen in previous books come up again. And so this really, really solid sense of reality about that is... It's very, very much present in this book. This feeling that, Helena has this family, and we've seen, we met this family before back in the first book. And, we know about Petro's wife and his kids because we had seen them before, because we've heard about them, because we've met them, because it's a thing. And... the story of how Maia lost her husband several books back continues to play into where we are right now. This is a really, really great series for people who like books where things are definitively not happening in a vacuum in each book. But I do really, really like the fact that these can stand alone if you need them to. So, yeah, this is nice, and there's even a kind of a twist at the end in terms of who was actually behind the murder. I think that's all, and I will see you all next week.